Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Oil is surging this morning. It's up about 3%, trading at $74.23 for a barrel of West Texas Intermediate. That's after the U.S. and allies launched more than 60 airstrikes overnight on Houthi targets in Yemen. They're trying to stop the Iran-backed group's shipping attacks in the Red Sea. Bloomberg's Nick Watams has more on the challenges ahead for the White House.
The challenge for Joe Biden is he said they want to deter the Houthis, but they also don't want to ignite a wider war. And the question is whether the Houthis will stand down. That seems somewhat unlikely, or use this as a rallying cry to only pursue their aims both against Israel, then seeking a ceasefire in Gaza, and against the United States and its allies.
Bloomberg's Nick Watams reporting the Houthis say the attacks killed 5 of their members and wounded 6 others, and they are promising the strikes will not go unanswered.
Well, back here in the U.S., Nathan, closing arguments have been delivered, and now we wait for the judge's decision in a New York civil fraud trial of former President Donald Trump. And Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports.
New York Attorney General Letitia James is seeking $370 million in fines and to bar Trump from the New York real estate industry.
No matter how powerful you are, no matter how rich you are, that no one is above the law.
Appeals are likely, but this case could end Donald Trump's role in New York real estate for good. Trump spoke out in court, attacking the judge overseeing the case and Attorney General James. Later, he gave a press conference outside the courtroom.
She's a political hack, the Attorney General. The judge is obviously extremely friendly with the group.
The Attorney General's office says Trump orchestrated a sweeping fraud in which he inflated his net worth to obtain favorable loans. The judge expects to rule by January 31st. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, Amy, thank you. Meanwhile, President Biden's son Hunter may face a trial of his own this summer, right in the middle of his father's reelection campaign. Hunter Biden has pleaded not guilty to charges that he failed to pay taxes on millions of dollars in foreign business income. That followed the collapse of a plea deal last year. The judge in Los Angeles says he's considering a June 20th trial date.
Well, turning to the markets now, Nathan, we continue to watch Bitcoin following yesterday's historic Wall Street debut. The first U.S. exchange-traded funds investing directly in the largest digital currency finally went live. And we get the latest from Bloomberg's John Tucker. John.
And Karen, the batch of almost a dozen funds, including offerings from investment powerhouses BlackRock and Fidelity Investments, got off to a strong start. With $2.3 billion exchanging hands, the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust saw the largest ever first-day turnover for an ETF. Grayscale Investments CEO is Michael Sonenshein.
It's just such a historic moment and such a milestone. So thrilled, feeling really good today.
A BlackRock iShares Bitcoin Trust saw $1 billion change hands. That's the 5th largest ETF launch on record. Several firms turned to fee waivers in a bid to stand out, offering their ETFs for free for the first 6 or 12 months. One of the next stages of Wall Street adoption is going to be when options tied to these ETFs are approved. Bitcoin this morning down about 0.5% to about $46,000. John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thank you. Now, the focus for investors this morning turns to earnings, specifically bank earnings, with 4 of Wall Street's biggest reporting today. We get a preview from Bloomberg's Sonali Basak.
Investors will be watching for what the cost base looks like. Has it gotten more expensive to operate, and can they keep those costs in lines under further pressure on certain lines of revenue? Revenue might jump this year relative to last year for some of these banks. Investors will be watching for net interest income expectations at Bank of America, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, and Citigroup as interest rates start to stabilize in 2024 relative to the year before. Now, the question is, who's the big winner? And how many loans do Americans really need? And how many of those loans start to go sour? Sonali Basak, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Sonali, thank you. On the economic front, we'll get another reading on inflation this morning. The Producer Price Index is forecast to have risen 0.1% in December. The report comes a day after consumer prices rose more than expected. Cleveland Fed President Loretta Mester says the latest data may put on talk of a possible rate cut on hold.
I think March is probably too early in my estimation for a rate decline because I think we need to see some more evidence. I think the December CPI report just shows there's more work to do.
And Cleveland Fed President Loretta Mester says the latest figures reinforce her view that policy is in a good position to assess incoming data on prices and employment.
And overseas, Karen, Christine Lagarde says the European Central Bank will start lowering interest rates once it's convinced inflation's headed back to its 2% goal. Here's the ECB president speaking through an interpreter on French television.
I cannot give you a date, but if we win this battle, if we reach the 2% inflation target, as we predict in 2025, and if it's confirmed by the data in the months to come, if this goes according to plan, and I'm being careful the way I say it, but I'm very confident, then the rates will start going down.
And after Christine Lagarde spoke, money markets adjusted their rate cut bets. They now firmly favor 0.25% reductions this year instead of 5.
Well, the UK economy saw a modest rebound in November. Nathan, gross domestic product rose 0.3%, bouncing back from a drop of the same scale in October. Economists had expected an increase of 0.2%.
And staying in the UK, Karen, shares of Burberry are being taken to the cleaners this morning. The trench coat maker slashed its profit forecast due to a drop in sales in the key Christmas quarter. At one point, the shares were down 14%. Now Burberry is lower by about 7%.
All right, Nathan, thank you. It's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Amy Morris. Amy, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. A polar vortex is about to unleash an Arctic blast across much of the U.S. this weekend. Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn tracking the system.
Blizzard warnings are in effect over parts of Iowa, Illinois, and southern Minnesota, while winter storm warnings are in effect for much of the western and central Great Lakes. Wind advisories stretch from Texas into western New York and western New England. Flood watches are in effect from coastal portions of New England along the coast of New Jersey.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn, and the storm is going to bring with it bitter cold temperatures on the day of the GOP Iowa caucus. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is urging his supporters to brave the cold this coming Monday.
So I'm asking you to go out there. I'm asking you to brave the elements.
Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley also acknowledged the coming bitter cold, asking for support at the polls.
I'm going to be out there, and I want you to go out there.
Haley has topped DeSantis for the first time in the latest Iowa poll, but former President Donald Trump holds a dominant lead. Now that the Pentagon Inspector General is looking into the secret hospitalization of Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, the administration is defending its procedures. Bloomberg's Nancy Lyons with the very latest.
The Inspector General will be looking into the process that's being followed for tracking Secretary Austin. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby says there is already a check-in every morning that is logged.
We're not going to track the GPS coordinates on somebody's mobile phone in the administration, and we're not going to plant a microchip in their neck like they're a poodle. They check in every day, and we know where they are.
Kirby admits the White House does need to know if a cabinet official becomes hospitalized or needs to delegate his or her authority. In Washington, Nancy Lyons, Bloomberg Radio.
The International Court of Justice is hearing South Africa's case accusing Israel of genocide in its war in Gaza. Francis Boyle is professor of international law at the University of Illinois and is a legal advisor to the state of Palestine.
South Africa presented a solid case. I predict South Africa will win in order against Israel to cease and desist from committing all acts of genocide against the Palestinians.
Israel is set to present its case today. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, Amy, thank you. Well, we do bring you news throughout the day right here on Bloomberg Radio. But now you can get the latest news on demand, and that means whenever you want it. Just subscribe to Bloomberg News Now to get the latest headlines at the click of a button. Get informed on your schedule. You can listen and subscribe to Bloomberg News Now on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, plus Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update. Here's John Stashower. John.
Karen, what a wild 24 hours of football coaching departures. First, Pete Carroll in Seattle, followed quickly by Nick Saban in Alabama, and then yesterday morning, Bill Belichick in New England. Between the three, they held their most current positions for a total of 55 years. Saban and Belichick are close friends. In the 1990s in Cleveland, Saban was Belichick's assistant. When Belichick became Patriots coach, he replaced Carroll. And in 1980, Carroll left his job as defensive back coach at Ohio State and was replaced by Saban. NFL playoffs begin tomorrow. Wild card round with Cleveland at Houston. The Browns quarterbacked by 38-year-old Joe Flacco. The Texans by 22-year-old C.J. Stroud. And then in what's expected to be a frigid, cold night in Kansas City, it's the Chiefs against the Dolphins. Triple header on Sunday, and then on Monday, Philadelphia plays at Tampa Bay. The Celtics went to Milwaukee, top two teams in the East. It was all Bucks, up 75-38 at halftime. Milwaukee won 135-102, now 26-12 on the season, while the Celtics dropped to 29-9. Talk about a blowout. It was Oklahoma City 139 and Portland 77. So the Thunder won by 62. There was a game in Paris. Cleveland got 45 points from Donovan Mitchell. Beat Brooklyn 111-102. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports.
From coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Washington, D.C., nationwide on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. The risk of a wider war in the Middle East is in focus. The U.S. and U.K. launched dozens of airstrikes overnight against Houthi militants in Yemen. This follows weeks of attacks on Red Sea shipping that the Houthis have pledged to continue until Israel stops the fighting against Hamas in Gaza. For the latest, we're joined by Rosalind Matheson, our Europe, Middle East, and Africa news director for Bloomberg News. Roz, thanks for being with us once again. Now the Houthis are saying that these new airstrikes will not go unanswered. They say several of their members have been killed. What is the risk of a wider war at this point?
Well, that is the big question in the aftermath of this. The US had been saying for some days, unless the Houthis stopped their attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, that there would be, quote, consequences. So in a way, they were compelled to do something. And these were very tactical, surgical strikes. The Houthis are saying that the death toll was 5 on their end and fairly small. And these strikes were very well telegraphed also, which allowed them to clear out of some of their bases. So it does seem the objective was to make a point to the Houthis without escalating and the Houthis feeling they need to take massive retaliation, or more importantly, their big backers, Iran, feeling they need to take some kind of retaliatory action. So it seems to have been sort of a calibrated response by the US and the UK and their other partners overnight. Of course, it does come, though, at a time of high tension in the region. You've got the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza still going on. You've got this disruption to shipping in the area. You've got Hezbollah occasionally having rocket exchanges with Israel from Lebanon in the north. And so there's a lot going on at the moment and a high tension environment. And so the question is, at what point, if any, do some of these Iranian proxies tip things over into a full-scale conflict? At least the initial interpretation from these airstrikes overnight is that it's not designed to do that.
We do have not just the Houthis backed by Iran, but Hezbollah backed by Iran that's been engaged in cross-border skirmishes with Israel for months now as well. We are seeing this jump in oil prices. You have to wonder, when we're seeing the possibility of multiple fronts opening up in this war, whether we could see even further risk premium placed on commodities.
It was interesting because the main move overnight was in oil, and it moved up about 2% or so. But other sort of major assets were fairly calm in the face of this because, again, it had been well telegraphed. And right now, the main thing is that even though there are these disruptions to shipping and there are concerns particularly about what Iran might do next, supply has not been massively impacted. And it comes at a time, of course, where there are sort of question marks over demand at the other end. And so you're not really seeing this long sort of running premium come into either oil or gas. What you are seeing is disruption to supply chains that may escalate, and that may start to affect more companies who need to have their parts or products shipped through that part of the world. And that could be a real issue if the Suez Canal comes into the mix further. But it's interesting to not see a massive move so far in oil or gas in recent weeks and even overnight. And that is a signal that the market really seems to think that supply is not currently at risk.
In terms of trying to tampen down the tensions in the region, what's the balance that the Biden administration is trying to strike here when we are starting to see these attacks take place just after Secretary of State Antony Blinken had been back in the region trying to urge Israel to lower the temperature with Hamas?
Well, that's right. He just wrapped up his latest trip, which was his fourth, I think, in quick succession. And he toured the region and he visited a lot of countries to get their sense of things, and then ended up in Israel at the end. But his message has been about, ensuring that this doesn't spill over into a broader crisis, messaging quite strongly with Iran on that front, but also trying to press Israel to de-escalate its conflict on the ground in Gaza. And so far, the signs are that Israel's not particularly interested in doing that. They say that their ultimate goal remains the same, which is to make sure that Hamas can never again attack them in the way that they did back in October. And there's work still to be done there. So it seems as though the US is not having massive success getting Israel to listen to them on that front. And Israel says their war in Gaza is likely to go on at least for some months yet. And then the big question about what happens in Gaza, obviously, when the fighting stops. And so even though Blinken in his trip and other US officials are sort of touting the desire of everybody to find some stability in all of this, you wouldn't really think that he came away from his latest trip with much to show for it.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.